but never to stay. Who am I?
Hello and welcome to Faultlines Special. I'm Javad Tehami. As the country has been raked by incessant rains and the subsequent massive floods across the nook and the corner of the country, 116 districts out of 160 total districts in the entire country have been directly hit by these massive floods. Now, let's take a little bit of stock about what kind of damage and the destruction this particular flood has caused. 1,033 lives have been lost and over 1,500 people have got injured, and over 1 million houses were destroyed as a result of these floods, and over 800,000 livestock have also been lost. Talking specifically about the infrastructure damages and the destruction, over 150 bridges were swept away, while 3,500 kilometer roads were damaged, and many small and medium dams were swept away as well. Now, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is leading from the front in order to steer those efforts for the relief and the rescue of the flood-affected people. Especially, he went to Sindh province back-to-back in last 2 days, and today he visited Jafarabad in Balochistan as well, and he has announced 10 billion rupees for Balochistan province, and earlier he announced 15 billion rupees for the Sindh province. Now, there is another announcement by Prime Minister regarding the damage to the houses of the flood-affected people. Around 5 lakh rupees would be given to those people whose houses have been partially damaged, and 10 lakh, 1 million rupees would be given as a compensation to those people who have got their houses completely destroyed. Not only this, the Pakistan Armed Forces contingents are deployed across the country, and they are also leading the relief and rescue and rehabilitation efforts from the front. Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa personally went to the province of Sindh a day before yesterday, and yesterday he visited Balochistan to review the relief and the rescue measures which are undertaken by the army contingents over there. Around 212 relief centers and camps have been established by Pakistan Army. Not only this, Pakistan Navy contingents as well as Pakistan Air Force are also making every effort in order to provide relief and rescue to the flood-affected people. And this is what is happening inside the country. At the same time, the President of Pakistan as well as Prime Ministers urged the international community and the organizations to come in to give that aid in order to avert this catastrophic situation that Pakistan is right now faced with. And now we've been getting the calls from the Western countries that include Canada. The UK has announced aid for Pakistan, 1.5 million pounds for Pakistan for the flood-affected people. French president also called Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and also offered aid. Talking about the Muslim Brotherly countries, we've got calls from Turkey, UAE, Qatar, Iran and Azerbaijan as well, and aid has arrived from Turkey and UAE already. So there is a lot that is going on in order to avert this catastrophe that Pakistan is faced with right now. On Tuesday, the United Nations is going to launch a flash appeal of $1.6 billion, and similarly, Asian Development Bank as well as the World Bank, they have also offered aid regarding this particular thing. Let's bring in our panelists regarding this particular massive floods and the scale of the damage and the destruction it has caused. Right up from north till the south in Pakistan. I'm joined in the studio by Mr. Dr. Asif Javed, who is environmental expert. Thank you very much for your time at Faultlines today. So when we talk specifically about this flood, this time around, there was a flood back in 2010 in Pakistan as well. We had been talking about this flood over the last couple of weeks, and many experts say that this particular flood is much bigger in scale, and it has caused massive destruction and damage as compared to that of the 2010 floods. So what's your assessment or initial assessment about this flood as compared to the previous one?
Jawad, first of all, this flood or these type of floods are not a new thing for scientists. Scientists long ago predicted these type of consequences as results of climate change, as repeatedly I am saying at every forum whenever I go. So this is not surprising, but at least this is like in this during this flood session, we have more than 133% more rainfall compared to a 30-year of average. So this is quite massive, and obviously when these type of floods are coming, Jawad, actually flood comes every year. This is a natural process. It is nothing more than natural process, but intensity varies from the year to year. So this time we have more intense rainfall as compared to the, and we have massive floods in 2010. So this is again the catastrophe, you can say, like it has cost many lives, many people are dead, livestock have grown, loss to the infrastructure, loss to the economy, and secondary effect would be like food crisis followed by the health crisis. So we will face all those things. Because why this is coming? Because this will come because climate change intensify these natural processes. More intense rainfall in shorter period of time, it results in a flash flood, massive flooding in a very shorter time of period. Basically what happened is the lag time decreases. Lag time is basically the difference between the rainfall event and the runoff event. So lag time decreases with different activities like urbanization, like concrete infrastructure and all those things, lag time decreases. So that's why it causes more devastation. And the problem lies on our side also, because why we allow the buildings on floodplains? If we allow the buildings or infrastructure on the floodplain, obviously flood will come. It's a natural process. Even if it is not intensified, still it can cause some damage. So there should be a strict regulation in that regard to save the property.
What does this time it has to do with? Is it because of the mismanagement, as you just mentioned? Why do we allow the construction of that we call those encroachments along the river beds or somewhere in between? We have seen also. So, or is it? Does it have to do with the climate change impact overall this time around in specific?
This is the combination of factors. Climate change has its own role to play. We cannot nullify that climate change doesn't have any role in causing these type of extreme events, because scientists long ago is predicted and still are predicting, and we can face these type of consequences in the future. So our focus should be on the adaptation side. Do tell me, Jawad, how many dams we have constructed after 1947? There are only 2 dams. Pakistan has been clearly declared as a water scarce country. So this
is it really water scarce country?
Yes, it's water scarce country.
The quantity of water we've got,
yes,
and we've seen. So I'll come back to you. This is an interesting point. The construction of the dams remains to be one of the viable options in order to avoid the catastrophic situations out of these such massive floods. We are also joined by Dr. Shafkat Munir Ahmed. He's joining us on Skype. He's humanitarian policy specialist and a research fellow at the Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Dr. Ahmed, thank you very much for your time at Faultlines also. So as you might have heard Dr. Javed saying that this is a combination of factors, the damage and the destruction that we are seeing as a result of these massive floods. It has on one side to deal with the climate change and also the lack of adaptability by the management or the authorities over the years. So what's your take on this?
I think on the mismanagement side, I would say it's not just mismanagement. It is that we have not even thought of what we need to do when such scale of emergencies hit. When 2010 floods occurred, I was working here with one of my international job, and I was looking at that there were uh, Pakistan's DRR policies and Pakistan National Disaster Management Plan. They were built on the basis and lines of the HIGO framework of action. It was adopted in 2005, and down the line after that, we have not updated our policies yet. We have not a policy thinking or even moving beyond, because in 2015, a new framework came into being, which is called Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. I think one thing Dr. Javed talked about is adaptation. Adaptation and disaster risk reduction, DRR. We call it CCA DRR. These are two phenomena through which we cannot avoid floods, or we cannot avoid the occurrence of these events. But these event can occur, but we can still save millions of lives, millions of people from the disaster or the impact of disaster, which we actually did not think of. Look at, as Dr. Javed, he's a scientist, I am from the policy side. We always quote the scientists that now last year 2021, there was a COP meeting in Glasgow. I was there, and there we have been pushing for loss and damages, because climate change is not seen as such as a phenomena itself, but through the disaster and natural hazards, we see that climate change is taking place. But we have to build a correlation between these two when we have to build our case for climate finance. Now, in when we are moving towards COP27, which will be organized in November this year in Egypt, where the debate would be on loss and damage. Now we can have a chance. We should build our case, because the massive scale destruction or the massive scale humanitarian need we at the moment we alone cannot do it. Even we cannot opt for adaptation. If only
Right, that is
adaptation.
exactly the point. Dr. Ahmed, when we talk about the impact of the climate change and the kind of devastation it is causing, especially for Pakistan, which is the lowest emitter in carbon, but it is paying the price. But we see in the region there are a couple of neighboring countries which are very high in carbon emissions, and they're not able to control it over the years. But when we specifically talk about the climate change phenomenon in itself, it is a slow process that, as you mentioned, it is not seen. But when it comes to research at that level at which you are doing it, it is considered that is something happening. But when, as an impact of these climatic changes, such massive floods occur, so what exactly should be done by the authorities in the short term as well as in the long run?
Well, that is a very valid question, and I was coming here. Uh, in the short term, we have to certainly rescue the people. We have to reach out to the people. We have to provide them basic things, because when floods hit, it wash away everything, the belonging, their household, and there are certain people who have very specific needs. I would quote here: everyone is needy at the moment who have been affected by this disaster. But particularly, if you look at women in general, they need their sanitation requirements are different, and if they are lactating mother, they have to have that kind of an safe space there. And similarly, for the children, those who are in the age of lactation, they need special, some children
Dr.
get
Ahmed, your point
mother.
is well taken. I can understand what you're trying to say. My question is, when it comes to climate change and its impacts, how can we avoid such disasters in the short term as well as in the long run? When we talk about the climatic changes, as you mentioned, when we talk at the platform of research, it is considered something that is happening, taking shape every day. But when such massive floods come, they come just within a nick of a second and cause huge destruction. So, what needs to be done to avoid such catastrophes in the short term? We'll come to the rescue and relief efforts that are underway
Okay,
and
okay,
how.
okay. Let me take up this point here. For climate change is basically a realization of the events taking place. The climatic changes are taking place, weather conditions are changing, the atmospheric temperatures is rising because of the carbon emissions. Now, immediately the nation, those who are habitual of planting trees. For example, if you look in South Asia, if you look at Nepal, Nepal is a country where communities have started planting trees, and they have got benefit out of it because there is an agreement, international agreement, Red Plus, which provide you dollars if you grow more trees, and the carbon emission is deposited, or the carbon stocks are deposited on these trees, then these communities get that benefit. And the additional benefit is that the climatic changes hit comparatively less when you grow trees and when you change your habits. For example, SDG 12, I would quote here, this relates to not only government, this relates to you, me, and everyone. What we do, we overconsume, we overproduce. The production of
That's
the
perhaps
cotton.
because of the rising population all the time and the kind
Yeah,
of
one is
geometric growth
population.
in population we've got
Jawad,
over the.
one is population. One is population that we are growing or producing for the population. But the other thing is, for example, fast fashion. Look at it, how many people have a lot of stock in their cupboards, but still they keep buying. And the producer producing it. For producing the cloth from 1 kilogram of cotton, hundreds of liters of water is required. Similarly, for washing, dyeing, there are many procedures, and not only one, the textile sector. We have habitual of over consuming things. You look at the how much sugar is used in our drinks. Drinks are not necessary for life. So my point is that we are lagging behind in many of the SDGs, and typically SDG 12, 13, 14, 15, all are related to climate change. And
And
even
if
if
we,
you look
Dr.
at
Ahmed,
9,
if we lack on these SDGs, naturally it would have an effects on other SDGs as well. For example, that SDG for poverty alleviation and expanding the educational spectrum. We'll come
certainly.
to this particular
Yeah.
point as well. We are joined by another participant now, Mr. Munawar Mirza. He's joining us on the phone line. He's a senior journalist joining us from Karachi. Mr. Mirza, thank you very much for your time at Faultlines as well. Let's talk about the situation in Sindh province in general and Karachi city in particular. We've seen that these rains, these incessant rains, have caused the massive flooding. Now, when we talk about these floods heading downstream, because most of the flood still remains to be in KP and then it is moving towards Punjab. When it will reach Karachi, do you think the authorities over there are prepared enough in order to mitigate the impact of the flood which is flowing downstream?
Javed, first of all, I will tell you that the infrastructure which we have built up till now in the last 75 years is not enough to face the havoc which is being created by such a calamity which has fallen today. I have seen floods in at least for the last 30 years, and they have been massive floods, and they have created massive destruction all over the country. However, this time the rainfall and the intensity of the flood is such that it seems that it is unbearable. However, I would like to point out that the administration has been very active. They have responded to this calamity immediately. Though, as I have pointed out, our infrastructure, which we have built, was not reasonable. It was not in a position to cope up with such a calamity. We have been talking a lot about the climate change. I have been hearing it. I have personally attended the Paris meeting with the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, and there almost 2,000 people gathered, and they talked about this climate change, the effects of the climate change, and it was there also that the Pakistani representatives, even the Pakistani, the then Prime Minister, pointed out that Pakistan has very less contributed towards this climate change, but the sufferers will be the most because
So, Mr.
Pakistan
Mirza,
is
what was the
one.
response by the international leaders to the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif when he mentioned this bitter fact that Pakistan remains to be the lowest emitter of carbon, but it is the sufferer, it is paying the price because of something that is being done by the neighboring countries?
What I heard from the leaders, it was not particularly Pakistan, but they committed a huge sum, billions of dollars, at least in commitment. I have not seen them coming down to the ground, but they committed billions of dollars towards the underdeveloped countries, including Pakistan, to help to cope up with such calamities. And if you remember that during the last 5 years, even the most highly developed countries, such as United States, have faced such calamities. You remember the cyclone which hit New York. The water was there in almost each and every house, and it had destroyed almost all the infrastructure of New York. However, since they were developed, but we ourselves are also to be blamed. We have talked also very less about climate change. We have got very little awareness about climate change. We think that this is just a topic which should be discussed and foregone. However, let Javed, just to point out, Pakistan has to face this particular calamity. I mean, the rain and the flood for only 2 months. It starts from July round about 12, and it ends
Exactly, Mr. Mirza.
round
Beg your
about in
pardon for the
September.
interruption. You mentioned a very important point, and that was an endorsement to the statement which is given by the climate change minister, Ms. Shari Rahman, a couple of days before. She says that infrastructure in Pakistan is not designed, the cities are not designed for such massive downpours without any break. Let's go back to, please stay with us. Let's talk to Dr. Javed, who is with us in the studio. So, what about, how do you see this statement? As Mr. Mirza has also mentioned, when former Prime Minister Mohammad Nawaz Sharif was there in Paris, and there was a mention of this infrastructure over there as well. Similarly, coming from the climate change minister, how could there be a possibility? Does it mean that we should revamp the entire infrastructure in Pakistan?
No, the problem does not only exist in Pakistan. It also exists at international level. For example, as Munawar mentioned, in the Paris Accord, initially it was Kyoto Protocol, which America, United States initially they were back out, and Biden again backed the US into Paris Accord. Anyways, we have wasted a lot of time in all these discussions because they are the big emitter, China is the big emitter. The problem is there should be a clear set of policies for developed nation and developing nations like Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, Nepal, and all those things. Or highly. Like for example, developed world should focus more on the reduction of greenhouse gas emission. At the same time, our focus should be more on the adaptation side, because you mentioned so many times we are paying the high cost, despite of the fact our contribution in greenhouse gas is less than 1%. So, and I should go beyond that. We also need to improve our geopolitical relationship between India, Bangladesh, Nepal, because we all are combined sufferer. So, combinedly, if we raise our voices, and we should get more funds towards the adaptation side, not on the medication side. So that will really help out.
What do you think Pakistan can take India on board in this regard, because India remains to be one of the highest emitters?
Yes, you see, no, India is not that. You cannot say, you cannot compare India with the West. Simple, like India is also developing country, so it also comes. But India is also big sufferer of the effect of climate change, just like Pakistan and Bangladesh also.
Right.
You have
So
seen, you have observed the massive floods, in the last couple of weeks in the
are there
Bangladesh
any
region.
practices in India that could be adopted here in Pakistan as well? Are they coping up with such type of floods well as compared?
No, that all problem exists with all the developing countries. They don't have technical resources, and they also don't have financial resources to cope. So obviously the burden will fall on the poorest of the poor, or in other words, the poor countries like developing countries like Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. So we need to improve our infrastructure. It requires resources. Now, initially at this emergency, obviously priority should be given to the rescue and rehabilitation. And once it has been completed, it should not be, the issue should not be taken on the hindsight. It should keep alive, and we should keep on working on long term management. Strategy should be formulated for long term management. At least uh, there should be a clear policies, local level policies, so that that can avoid building, avoid the construction of buildings and infrastructure on floodplain, rather to encourage the ecotourism. Like for example, Billion Tree Tsunami was a very good project in terms of well I mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, Pakistan
So
has been
planting trees is a viable option in order to avoid climatic changes, but it doesn't happen to be a viable option in the short term.
no, it's not short. Short term, obviously, we have to go for rehabilitation and rescue. That should be priority. That's what we are doing right now. The whole nation and Pakistani people, nation, and armed forces, they are very good at that. But I'm talking about long term management at this, because this flood will come again in 2023 and in 2000. Intensity will vary, obviously, but it can cause destruction, all those things. And
Sorry, Javed,
Jawad,
I
we are
would like to
unlucky nation
interject
because for
from
11
the
months we are crying for a water, that we don't have any water.
Yeah, every
and
year this monsoon happens, and
and we have water everywhere.
water everywhere, and we can't
And water
manage
is
it properly.
And water is going
So-
to Arabian Sea.
So let's get back to Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed, as far as the relief and rescue operations which are underway in the flood affected areas, so what are the requirements? What is the assessment? Is there any initial assessment by your institution how the things should be done ideally at this point in time?
Well, we are connected with the field teams. We are getting assessment. So far, the assessments are being used what is available officially, but the scale is massive than the statistics we have at the moment. Because the people from the field, when they told the stories, they tell about a lot of miseries they are facing. Actually, this massive level scale, this is because of the rains and floods. There was not even a time to tell or activate the early warning system. That is why, and people were not expecting a level of the emergency that hit during these monsoon rains. So because of that, even most of the people, there is a limitation of people when they move. For example, we have to look at for elderly people, they cannot evacuate. Similarly, the people living with disabilities cannot evacuate themselves. And the women, particularly at household, because of the cultural thing, they cannot evacuate themselves or their children without, support of their counterparts, the male counterpart. These are some of the taboos also. That's why the emergency hit them, and immediate requirements are that at the moment, whatever we have talked on to the people in ground on ground, they say immediately they do not need a ration. They need cooked food. They need energy biscuit. They need dates. They need water. They need milk for their children and for themselves. They also need safe spaces for children, because the children who are going to school, they have no place to go and sit. Similarly, there is a trauma. There should be a counseling mechanism of the communities, people, women, children, elderly people, and more of it immediately. They only doesn't need uh, food. They need some non-food item. For example, as I was earlier talking about the specific needs of women, the elderly people, we have to provide these things, and then their beds and other places, mats, utensils, buckets, these kind of things. Initial, the things they need for that, and more of it. To my experience, I have been to almost 13, regional level emergencies of this scale, whether it is in Philippines, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, many countries. As a humanitarian policy person, I have been to these places. People need whatever, over the last 15 years, our experience is that immediately give them cash, cash for work or cash for their urgent needs, so that markets can be up and running, they can buy things. But before that, they should be rescued and provide tents and places of, the living places. If, Jawad, here I would like to add, which actually I was earlier wanted to add, is that In 2010, there were clear, recommendation by people like us, those who are on ground, that now we have to build back better in a sense that we have to have raised platforms. Look at the recommendation was that hospital should be at higher level, the school should be, college should be at a raised platform, and the stocks, particularly contingenting stocks, should be in each district. Now you have seen the emergency is hit, but there is no 24-hour response to
Right,
the people
right.
because there are
Dr.
no
Ahmed, I'll come back to
contingency
you.
stocks.
There are a couple of other important and pressing things which we
Yeah.
need to discuss and take your view on. We are joined by another participant in the show, Mr. Zahid Gishkori, who is a senior journalist. Mr. Zahid, thank you very much for your time at Faultlines as well. So let's talk about the situation there in South Punjab in specific. Army troops are busy in providing relief and rescue to the people, and they have also taken out the people who are stranded over there, especially in Rajanpur today. So, could you share with our viewers what is the current situation there, how the relief and the rescue efforts are going on there?
Actually, in this worst flood of the decade, now the apex center is the South Punjab, particularly the Rajanpur district, the poorest district in Punjab, and then the district Laya, and somehow the Bhakkar, and then Kotadu, and then the Muzaffargarh. These are the areas of South Punjab. Obviously, it's a river in this bed. Rajanpur has been the worst victim in this flood. Around around about 1 million people found homeless in this flood. And you ask about the relief operation. Yes, it has been somehow it's a good extent in Rajanpur, but obviously this is the first time after 2010 that the relief operations are quite slow in a way that only government operational machinery is operating in different parts of the country, particularly in South Punjab, because the NGOs were not allowed. Particularly, it's a no-go area for INGOs as well. So some good organization like being headed by Jamaat Islami or some couple of local organizations were operating. The mainstream rescue operation is being conducted by Pakistan military. Obviously, around 9,000 troops were mobilized in these areas, and the rescue 1122 as well. But these two were the major relief operators in these areas. Uh, but now, as I told you, this is the epic center of the first were in KP and then in Balochistan, and then
So,
after
Mr. Zaid, when you
uh,
talk about the relief centers or the relief camps which have been established, especially by Pakistan Army, so what is the concentration of those? Where are those camps established, and where the people are being shifted?
actually now the rescue operation is focusing on the food crisis because people need food who migrated through and left their houses are around about zero point 0.7 million houses are partially or completely damaged in district Rajanpur. So they are focusing on food, distributing food stuff among the victims and the people who are homeless. And most important is now uh, the medicine because the flood is now crossing the way and people shifted almost the rescue operations have been completed but post flood diseases spread out has been a problem now this problem is going to start as the doctor said at the relief operator who are mobilizing the people who are there particularly in livestock so it, this would be another issue. And the death toll, today is crossed around 1,150.
Right,
Uh, uh,
right. So there are going to be new challenges when it comes to the rehabilitation phase. Mr. Zahid Gishgori, Senior Journalist, thank you very much for updating us regarding the relief and rescue efforts which are undertaken in southern Punjab, especially in the areas of Rajanpur and Laya and Dera Ghazi Khan. Let's talk to Mr. Mirza. Mr. Mirza, as Mr. Zahid has mentioned, the rehabilitation phase will definitely have more challenges. What sort of challenges do you think those people who've been affected, who were residing in the rural areas of Sindh, are going to face during that phase?
You are very right. The real challenge arrives when you are going in the rehabilitation stage, because this stage is the one which is the rescue stage. And in this stage, Pakistan Army always has always done very well, and this time also it is doing very well. We are also very fortunate that we have developed a body, NDMA. I personally was present when the earthquake of 2005 came, and I saw for the first time that we were able to develop a kind of body which could lay down policies which could be implemented on the ground. This is a most important thing in Pakistan. Now, coming to the problems which the rural areas of Sindh are going to face, you see, when the flood comes downstream to Sakhar, then all the embankments of the river, they overflow, and all the cities which are on these embankments, they are flooded. So first of all, they are hit by it. Most of the time, what we do is that we simply shift them to school, and later when the flood recedes, we put them back to their homes. We give them a certain amount of money. But I will point out one thing. There is another dimension to this. When we go in the rehabilitation stage, we cannot handle this scale of calamity. We require international aid. And now, what I have seen, as you have also recounted, that at the very early stage, we have been able to gear up the international aid, and you have even mentioned that even United States, United Nations, they are also Asian Development Bank. They are also all our friendly countries. Even I was saying that the Prime Minister was thanking the President of France for the help which he is going to provide to Pakistan. So the second dimension is the one actually which is involved in the rehabilitation state, whether it is in the rural areas of Sindh or whether it is in the rural areas of Punjab. Moreover, one thing I must point out, we must have not only a good infrastructure, but we must also have very good logistics so that we can move from one place to the other place when this flood strikes, so that we can rescue the people immediately, and we should be able to provide them with the immediate relief, which is the requirement, that is the food, medicines, and other things. When I was covering these floods,
Right,
the main
Mr. Mirza,
problem
this
with
is an
these people
interesting
has
and a
been this.
very important point. Not only the better infrastructure, but also the better logistics, because if any certain area is hit by such calamity, it is not cut off from the rest of the main areas or from rest of the country. Mr. Munawar Mirza joining us on the phone line, senior journalist from Karachi. Thank you very much for being at Faultlines. So when we talk about Dr. Javed, when we talk about the rehabilitation phase, so what exactly do you think, which segment of that particular affected area is going to be most vulnerable? Are these going to be the farmers or the unskilled workers? Because this flood has actually rattled the life to the core. People have lost their houses, they have lost their crops, they have lost everything whatever they had, even the livelihood. So it will take quite considerable time in order to revive their routine life.
Basically, these flood has affected each and every segment of society. Either it's a farmer, it's a common man, or it's a daily wagers, or it's a worker, or it's even it's government. It shattered the government, it shattered the organization. It will put burden on each and every individual on this country. But the problem is, Jawad, who is more vulnerable? You are asking about actually. The poorest of the poor is more vulnerable, whose land has been completely eroded by the flood, whose livelihood was totally dependent on the crops that was grown by the water, something like that. So their livelihood is at stake right now. After rehabilitation, what they will do, they need alternate income sources, or it requires a lot of a time to develop their land again to the level where they can grow a crops again and earn something for their children, for themselves, something. They are the most vulnerable people. And
So,
obviously,
do you think this happens to be the battle of survival now for those people, for those segments? So, do you think they would go for some drastic or desperate measures as a coping mechanism?
obviously we need crash program for these people, because ultimately they will come to the cities. The poor, they will come to, because to earn something, because they have lost their land, they have lost their livestock, they have lost their crops. So where they should go? So they need desperate help, not in terms of direct aid, rather for employment opportunity, engaging them in some business, something like that, because ultimately that will solve their problems somehow.
Right, Dr. Javed, unfortunately we are short of time. So let's go back to Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed, your final word, how the rehabilitation phase should be conducted, and how do you think the SDGs are going to be affected? Because if we specifically talk about the poverty alleviation, that SDG seems to be rattled right now because of these massive floods. So definitely all those efforts which have been already put in, all the SDGs are going to be affected badly.
Thank you, Jawad. First of all, we have to go for a real-time assessment. We need a proper assessment how many people are affected at what level, so that we can reach out to them. In rehabilitation phase, we have to reclaim the land which are submerged, and we have to provide them input so that they can start their growing again. Similarly, on the livestock, we have to provide them pieces of livestock, pair of livestock, so that they can start rebuilding their life. Rehabilitation policies should be backed by resources, and these resources should be used and utilized on the basis of the rehabilitation program, which should actually be on the theme of building back better, and no one left behind, which is the mantra of the SDGs. Already we are lagging
Nobody
behind on
should be
SDGs.
left behind. Dr. Shafkat Munir Ahmed, unfortunately we are short of time. Beg your pardon for the interruption. A humanitarian policy specialist and a research fellow, SDPI. Really appreciate your time. And also Dr. Asif Javed, who is environmental expert. Thank you very much for being in the studio. Pakistan is faced with humongous natural calamity, and it is the need of the hour, not only for the political unity. We've seen that the international community also coming to fore and announcing the aid to help the flood affected people here. And being the citizens of this country, it happens to be our responsibility in order to go forward and help all out, in an all-out way, all those people who have been affected badly by these massive floods. With that note, we come to the end of today's show. Until the next one, take very good care of yourselves.
A Ubia National Park is located in the lush hills of the Galiat forests that stretch from near Islamabad to Abbottabad and through to Azad Kashmir. They are not only areas of great natural beauty, but produce vital oxygen and provides homes for people and wildlife.